All right, welcome in, folks. I'm here with another great episode of I've Got a Theory. This is Henish with my guest, Mona Kiani. Mona, thanks for joining us.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. So, Mona, you're an educator. You've got a really impressive bio of all kinds of teaching and educational background. So this is your specialty. This is what you're
This is
passionate
what I breathe day in and day out and super passionate about it.
And how did you get into that? And what have been some of your biggest hits? And what are some of your goals that you wish to still accomplish?
Ooh, great questions. Actually, I never wanted to be a teacher. I wanted to either go to law school or go to med school. And then I reflected on what I was doing during my free time growing up. And that was always working with youth. So I had youth groups going up. I would always kind of like think throughout the week, like what kinds of lessons, like life lessons could I bring to them? And so that kind of informed my career trajectory. And I started in inner city Los Angeles, where most of my students were in a gang or a crew. We had 3 lockdowns in my first 3 months teaching, 2 stabbings and a shooting. And one of my students got stabbed in the head. Just neighborhoods where I really wanted to come in and make a difference, however I could. And then I've also taught abroad. I taught in Santiago de Chile, and then most recently in San Diego. So just have had various experiences. And now I work for an ed tech company, and I train teachers and I coach administrators. And it's been interesting just kind of watching the way schools have shifted. And also right now, as every educator is kind of questioning what is the back to school season going to look like with Corona. And so it's been a time to just be really thoughtful and critical of our whole educational system.
So what's your theory?
So I have a theory that education has been so focused on a couple of things. Student learning, that when a teacher has kind of the purest motive, it's really student learning. But then also we've been judged on the state assessment. So a lot of times the student learning gets a little tainted by our motivation being preparing students for a test.
Okay.
And my theory is that we've kind of got it all wrong. That yes, I 100% agree that student learning is imperative, but for what reason? And so I think that education needs to shift a bit more for students to learn with the purpose of getting engaged in their community to make it a better place. And so we'll call that social action, getting involved, taking action, and being a part of the change that we want to see in the world.
Great.
And
what's that look like? And how can we implement that?
Yeah, so I'll give you a few examples. A lot of times a teacher might say, okay, you're going to learn this topic for the sake of learning. One step further might be you're going to learn this topic so that one day you can be thoughtful about how you're going to shape society. And I think it has to kind of take the next step, which is you're going to learn this topic so that you can better understand the world around you, and that you can now, not someday, one day, but now make a difference in your community. And there's a few kind of foundational pieces that I think are missing. One is the way we look at youth. We don't look at them as empowered beings that are noble and able to make good decisions and take action that are going to positively impact the community. We tend to look at teenagers as kind of reckless and like, let's just get them through their teenage years and then they'll make a difference in the future. I think we've got it all wrong.
Yeah, it feels like almost the people that make these decisions don't have kids, because I've got young kids and I can already see them being effective at something. They're very persuasive with their family at the very least, right? Like even as little as 1 year old, the kid knows what to do to get some attention and solve his needs. So I would think that anyone 8 years older or older could be effective at something, and being helpful and being thoughtful. And there's some notable people that pop up that are effective from a very young age, right? What's Greta Thunberg with the climate change? She's been a big activist and getting a lot of noise. And now with social media, people that are young can have a voice and can have an impact and can be effective.
Absolutely. And I think the way that you mentioned being a parent and, having young kids and kind of seeing how they're already very persuasive, I think that's a big reflection on an adult. How does an adult view the child? The way that you view them, the kid steps into that and manifests that. And so if you're viewing a child as reckless and good for nothing, then that's how they're going to act. And if you're viewing them and you set your standard high of what they're capable of and then give them the tools to live into that, then they will. And there are a lot of teachers who think of students as like, oh, here we go again, middle school age or whatever it is, versus the teacher who looks at their students as a leader. And you could look at your student as a leader and still not give them the tools to enact that change. So I'll give you a very concrete example of what this could look like in a classroom. I'm a former middle and high school math teacher. And, in a lot of my classes, I would teach probability and statistics, relevant for any adult or young person watching the news or kind of consuming all this information on a daily basis. And a lot of times I'll ask you this question. When you think back to your middle and high school years and you learned probability, do you remember kind of what was what were some of the examples that your teacher used to teach you probability? Do you remember at all?
Yeah, absolutely. It's funny because I restudy this because I love probability because of
Oh,
all the games of chance I play, and I play poker. So I'm always studying, like re-upping on my factorials and my permutations and combinations. So yeah, prime example is poker, right? You've got 4 suits and you're looking for a flush, and there's this X number of cards out there. I'm trying to do the odds in my head of what are the odds that another club comes out so I can get my flush. And I always know it's like roughly 1 out of 4 for the suits or 1 out of 13 for the cards, but then you have to subtract out however many you see and stuff like that. So cards are prime example for stats and probability.
well, that's a really good example of how you've applied it. Now, I imagine, a lot of times probability is first introduced in like 5th, 6th grade. And then it's continued to be taught in the middle school years and then again cycled back to in the high school years. But a lot of times the way that teachers will teach it, sometimes they'll do cards. I like that example. It's a little bit more applicable, but a lot of times it's like, what is the probability you're going to pick out a red sock out of the drawer?
Right.
Let's be honest, who cares?
No one cares. Right.
Nobody cares. Nobody is going to open up their sock drawer, close their eyes, and wonder, okay, there's like a 10% chance I'm going to pull out a red sock. And so I think there's so many missed opportunities, and that's a prime example. Now, sure, we might need to simplify it to illustrate a point, but I'll give you an example of how I shifted my curriculum because I passionately believe in this. And so most of the things, anywhere I could, I found a way to immediately help students better understand the world around them and then take action. So I started a project called the Privilege Project, which is very relevant right now with the Black Lives Matter movement. And what we essentially did is in this topic of probability, instead of just looking at what's the chance I'm going to pick out the pink starburst, again, nobody calculates it. I asked the students, how does your privilege affect your probability of success?
Okay. So then that's hard to figure out without studies being done and larger scale statistics being given to drill down from, right?
Absolutely. So you bring in, and they have been done.
Right.
They do exist, right? And so as a math teacher, I brought all those in. I exposed my students to the counter narratives, to the stuff they're not being taught in their social studies classes. And then we simulated examples. So for example, there's a simulation you can do to look at the percentage of African Americans within the Chicago community, and then the percentage that Black people are actually being pulled over, the rate at which they're being pulled over, and seeing, okay, is this coincidence? Is there, subconscious bias,
right.
conscious bias? And so here the numbers can help illustrate a point. So that would be, I think, like better than the pulling a sock out of a drawer. But to me, that's still just step one. So the next layer, because now a student has an understanding of like, oh, wow, okay, this might exist. Now the next step is, well, now what can you do about it? So then I crafted an action research project where the students would come up with their own theory or kind of an essential question, like how does your sexual orientation affect your probability of getting a job? Something like that. And so they could look at, certain factors, studies that have been done, or they could collect their own data, which a lot of them would do. And again, you're learning all the math lessons I want to teach, you're learning through this. So we're not shortchanging. Instead, we're actually making education super relevant and engaging organically. So students would do that. And then, okay, again, next tier is like, okay, now you're a researcher in the world collecting your information. But to me, that's still shortchanging the potential of education. So now what are you going to do to be an active participant to change it? So if you see a problem, what now can you do? And so this is where now students were tasked to do something about it. So whether it's putting out a PSA, whether it's starting an organization that might address some of these issues, whether it's writing your local council members, whatever that is, now you're going to get involved. And so that was kind of the tiers in my class of how I try to take everything you're learning has a purpose. And fundamentally, I want students to walk away seeing that they are a valued member in shaping their future and their children's future and so on.
So let me bring up some semi-controversial angles to this, because I sometimes worry about this also from a financial literacy part, right? I'm a real estate broker. I own some companies here, and I really dislike it even when I meet adults that have very basic or very little financial understanding of their credit, their income, how debt works, how credit cards work. Is there an aspect to our education or public education system or any overall education system? There's an element of information asymmetry preservation. People are trying to keep people only to focus on history or science or English and at the basic levels to say that we've educated them, but never even spending the couple hours that it would take to explain how to read a credit report.
Absolutely. And I think kids are guilty of this. I think adults are guilty of this. I mean, so often people think they've mastered something. And so I think the lifelong pursuit of information and learning is an important thing to have. Part of it is there's always bias for a teacher. I'm going to present what I think is important. I'm going to take that angle. And so I think a part of doing justice to education is also having student-led projects so that they can take what the teacher might present and then they can create their own action research project. So I think in terms of that asymmetry, just making sure that there are multiple perspectives. And I do think that we have a lot of students who kind of graduate school and then think like, okay, well, I have this degree, and so now I'm a master of something. And so I think that concept, I mean, the more educated I got, the more I realized I knew nothing.
Yeah.
And so now I'm like, okay, continue to learn. So that lifelong pursuit for information.
Right. And I think that's the key thing that you want to instill in young people is that, hey, please don't limit yourself to this. I remember years ago, I was trying to teach a friend of mine how to get a little bit better at pool, like billiards, and he told me this, and I remember sticking with me. He's like, I'm past the skills acquisition phase of my life, is what he said. I was like, you don't want to learn anything anymore? You're only 30 years old or whatever he was. Right. He's like, nope, not interested. I'm doing what I'm doing, and that's it. I was like, man, that's a narrow-minded view. So it brings me to a second point, and I've got a few of these just because I've had guests on that we've talked about this. Isn't there a role for people that don't necessarily want to pursue some of these things that may be a better fit for a trade or a technical school and might not necessarily be interested in being socially active or socially effective or being aware of these kind of issues? Because they're like, I'd rather just work with my hands, and I'd rather save $100,000 in school loan debt to go to college and just go to a trade school where I can work as a carpenter, as a framer, as a tile lay person. Where does that fit into this overall picture, you think?
I'm not arguing that a student needs to go get the highest levels of education to be an active member in society. But I do think that there's a lack of connectedness. And so there's nothing wrong with going to trade school and being a carpenter. But you're being a carpenter for what purpose? Is it simply to make money? Is it because you like working with your hands? Well, anything you do, you can do with the spirit of service. So I think that that's kind of the fundamental thing. Wherever you take this, I think when a teacher can focus and education can focus on you are a part of the whole, as opposed to you're just some like isolated person and your role is just to get a job to make money. to live and then die and then it's over. And maybe you've accumulated some wealth that you can pass down, or a legacy like a lot of people want to have. We're missing the point of we are one of so many and we are a part of this. So we are social creatures, and the lack of oneness and kind of a collective consciousness, I think is widely lacking in education. So it doesn't matter what path you go on, but if you feel connected to the whole, then it is planting a seed of wanting to be of service to others. So maybe the service to others is literally your partner and your children, but we know that that's where it starts. So if that's lacking, then it has that domino effect of everywhere else into the community.
So it sounds like when you're saying let's give a social action purpose to education, it's also answering the big why, like what's the purpose of my life? And so I've said this before as well, which is like if you don't have something that you look forward to every day, then figure out how to help someone else, because that can be extremely satisfying and give you a good sense of why am I doing this? Why am I breathing? Why am I taking up resources? And ideally that kills a couple birds at the same time, because there is a lot of student depression, right? I don't have value. I don't have meaning in life. And it sounds like you're trying to address that problem, which is what's my meaning? What's my value in life? What's my big why? And if you can help other people, that's huge, right? If you're helping someone else, 99.9% of people will be like, I feel good about myself because I just helped this other person achieve something or accomplish something or improve their life somehow. Is that kind of the angle?
Absolutely, 100%. And we're seeing that there's rising depression, right? And so, and now with remote learning, you're less distracted by like, okay, maybe I don't love learning, but like at least I have a social component to it. Well, now you're isolated, so your lack of connection to other human beings is accentuated, and students, as they're realizing like, oh wait, just going through what my parents or grandparents went through to like get a good job, make money, have kids, buy the house, buy the cars, whatever, they're finding a lack of fulfillment. And Tony Robbins talks about fulfillment comes from three things. It comes from love and connection to others. It comes from a sense of growth, so constantly growing. And then it comes from kind of making a difference in other people's lives, right? A service component to it.
Basically like a purpose, yeah, that you've got.
The purpose that you've got. And so ultimately, what I've noticed, and I'm guilty of it. I'm guilty of it as a teacher who started teaching when I was 22 years old. I taught for 9 years. I focused so much on what my teachers focused for me, which is be successful. And so that dream of being successful, which really what they're saying is like, get a good job, make money so you can just get through this life. It's missing some of those kind of deeper, like you're saying, the why, the I matter and I make a difference. And we just assume that's being taught at home, which it's not always. And
No.
sometimes it is, but it's definitely not always. And a lot of times parents are hoping that kind of character education and that, making this all matter is done at schools. And there's not really always, we're not always on the same page, especially in America. In other countries, it's a little bit more like the ethical or moral education is infused within the educational system. And here we're really like cut off from it. And I'm not necessarily saying that being kind of fanatic about going in the opposite direction is the move. Definitely don't think that bodes well in a lot of countries. But ultimately, when I'm emphasizing success to my students, and then they start to see, well, wait a minute, there's college graduates who have all this debt, who can't get a job. Maybe they're now driving for Uber or for Lyft. Like, why should I do this? Or if you're undocumented and you're going to hit a ton of those roadblocks as you go up, ultimately we focus on success instead of fulfillment. And I think, as you mentioned, one of the key piece is, do I matter? Do I make a difference to others? Can I be of service to others? And I think social action helps organically teach the student that you do matter. You can make an impact. Like you said, whether it's large scale with like a protest or making policy change, or very small, like I built this house to make a difference for this family as a carpenter.
Yeah, it's not an easy task to change the curriculum, right? And it's also not like, is this in the educational curriculum for teachers? Like when they get their masters of education, do they teach you that this should become an important part of what you're teaching the children, which is, let's put some purpose to things, and let's give kids a good reason and a good why to be effective and productive members of society?
Absolutely not. It's not taught. It's not part of the teacher training at all. It's not part of the ongoing professional development for teachers. It's absolutely not part of the curriculum by any stretch of the imagination. The closest we've gotten are two aspects. One is called growth mindset versus fixed mindset. Have you heard of this?
I have not.
Essentially what it means is, if you have a fixed mindset, you think, okay, I'm born a math person, or I'm naturally good at something. And so you kind of think like you have a limited capacity to actually grow in an area. It's kind of innately there.
Right.
Versus a growth mindset is, the harder I work, the more I'll grow, and mistakes are a part of my learning process. And so, it's good to fall down and get back up, sort of thing. So schools have shifted more towards that growth mindset mentality. Did you have something?
I'm just smiling because I just think of people like my parents. They're like, and I hate when people tell me something like, we're too old for that. I'm like, what are you talking about? What, you're too old for what? Like,
Right.
I'm not asking you to, lift things upstairs. I get that you could be too old for that, but you can't be too old to learn something.
Right. Exactly. So that's one of the shifts that's happened in education. And as a math teacher specifically, that's one of the subject areas where people are like, either I'm a math person or I'm not. And so the research coming out of Stanford by Joe Bowler, she's really championed this, is like helping students see that, no, you might not be good at music yet, but with hard work and persistence, you'll get there. You might not be good at math yet, but you can get there.
Right.
So that's one area that it has shifted, and it kind of permeated the educational system. And then the other is really around this world of emotional intelligence, which is actually what my research was on, and how emotional intelligence can assist at-risk students. And so there is a shift around that, of learning to manage your emotions, understand others' emotions, have empathy, compassion. When you're stressed out, how do you deal with that? But really, those are the extents, and they're still very surface level. And I think what's missing is that fundamental why, and some of those existential questions, like, why am I on this planet? And a lot of teachers are afraid to go there. And then others want to go there, but you get a lot of pushback. I mean, as a teacher, I've had administrators and parents just say, you're a math teacher, stick to the numbers.
Right.
The adults tend to want to fall to their comfort zone, which is how they were taught.
Right.
So it's not necessarily always embraced. Sometimes in charter schools where they're a little bit more, progressive, there's room for that. But you do definitely get pushback.
Is it partially because there's a religious aspect that doesn't include this big purpose of why in social service, even though that's a big thing that most religions teach, which is to help others and stuff like that? It kind of side skirts the overall or goal of a lot of religions, which is spend all your energy and love focusing on some higher power, versus spending a certain percentage of your energy on helping people and the planet that's right here at our feet.
Right. But I actually think that they're not so separate. You've kind of painted them as two different camps, and I see it as all the same thing. So for me, I mean, I grew up as a Baha'i. I don't know have you heard of the Baha'i faith?
I've been to Baha'i temples. I'm very familiar with it. I know it's
Okay.
kind of like an amalgamation of different religions a little
Right.
bit.
We believe in the unity of the world religion. So the way that I see it is, as I am serving other people and I'm serving the world around me, that is in service to a higher power, or kind of the universe, whatever you might call God, love, energy. So it's all one and the same. It's all connected. And the more, and I understand that right now religion feels like this very like loaded term, and a lot of people have kind of walked away from it. But especially here in San Diego, there is a movement towards spirituality and seeing oneness amongst all. So maybe keeping the word religion out of it, just because it is very loaded for people.
Sure.
And looking at more of this kind of spiritual component. Absolutely. I think schools have tried to really kind of make it cut and dry of like, we're not going to bring anything that even messes with that into the system. But I think when you do that, you've lost the point. right? You've lost the point that we are connected. So that when we see our Black brothers and sisters suffering, I'm not Black, but I should feel something. And when you're fully cutting out anything that brings together a sense of my being, that I am more than just a body, that there's a energy that connects me to other human beings. When you want to like fully sterilize me from that notion, then of course I'm not going to feel compassion for somebody else if I don't have to. So
Right.
I really actually do think that we've done that to our detriment of trying to sterilize education so much from any semblance of spirituality.
And we see some of that now with organizations that are community service oriented, right? Or that, schools that demand X number of hours before you can graduate, which uh, gets you to that point, right? Ideally, you spend a day of working or whatever you're doing for community service, and you get some feeling of satisfaction that, hey, I did something good with my time and my energy today. I was able to help someone out, whether they were less fortunate or not, and it's giving you that sense of that satisfaction. I remember hearing a quote a while ago. It's like, if you do the right thing, the money will chase you down, right? And so I try to live my life by that. It's like, I'm always reaching out and trying to help people. Hey, what can I do to help you with your business or your personal life? Because I'm finding that turns into, eventually someone's going to call me back and say, hey, could you help me with my business transaction or my real estate transaction? So it comes around, but it's teaching people to like look out for other people before they look out for themselves.
Right. Absolutely.
And that's a hard thing for people to get when we're taught in society that you got to be selfish, you've got to be rich, you've got to have the newest stuff, you've got to have a shiny new car and a big house, and you're never happy unless you buy enough stuff, right? So you get this converse goal that goes along with capitalism and consumerism, which is you have to buy things to be happy. And what you're teaching is very antithetical to that, which is you have to do the right things and believe the right things and help people to be happy.
Absolutely. And it's so interesting, the purity that young people have. They understand this concept so much faster than an adult does. Adults are crusty and jaded. A young person feels it like within themselves that, yeah, obviously I want to like help other people, but a lot of times it's just they have to be given the right opportunity for that. Right. And so I've noticed, in my 9 years of teaching, the hundreds of students I had each year, I could have welcomed into my classroom kind of the most jaded student. But when you're still in the eighth grade, ninth grade, 10th grade, there's an innocence to you where you really, in the same way that a baby is not yet like damaged in any way and just is a symbol of purity. The younger, there's a beautiful quote that says, instead of trying to repair men, raise healthy children, something.
Sure. Right.
But something along those lines. And that's why I feel passionate about working in the field of education. But they get it. It's in their bones. It's innately there that they understand this connectedness and wanting to help others.
So let me go slightly off topic, and this just came up to mind because I still like to learn a lot. And one of the magazines I read monthly, cover to cover, is National Geographic, and I find myself learning a lot from it. This month's issue was kind of a commemoration for World War II, and then in it had like a chart of all historical records of the biggest loss of life from major incidences throughout history. And on that chart, and I didn't realize this because they don't teach us this growing up, because I grew up in Michigan, I went to public school, and there's a lot of Native Americans killed by American settlers. And it wasn't like a few hundred or a few thousand, it was like 10 to 15 plus million. And so like they there's a lot of sugarcoating of history. And I wonder how that impacts it, because like if I knew that, I would like that emotional concept aspect of like, holy cow, we smoked 15 million Indians, so Native Americans, so we could have this continent. Would have made it a lot more compelling and historically relevant for me to like, why does this matter? Versus, oh yeah, we had Thanksgiving dinner with Indians and everyone got along peacefully, which is the image that was presented, right? And so there's this aspect of like, kids can take the truth. They see it, right? There's no filter anymore, right? You can't parentally filter your cell phones and the internet. So they're getting everything. So now it's like, why don't we just give them the proper information from the starting point and teach them the right stuff so they're aware of this, so they can prevent it, so they can solve these issues, instead of thinking that climate change is a hoax, instead of thinking that we're not just extincting species, and these other kind of information that there's conflicting information on. You're like, well, there's either facts or there's non-facts. I would think that that would be fall in the category of let's learn facts.
Right. And I think that kind of falls on a couple of things. One is when we think about who are the majority of teachers across the US, they fall in a certain demographic, right? And so making sure that we have a really diverse teaching staff, because the more diversity there is, the more those counter narratives are introduced, right? If I have all white male middle class teachers, there's a and not necessarily with bad intentions, but there's a certain gravitation towards teaching things the way they've been taught, because that's who wrote those history books. And so making sure, and right now, especially as we're looking at Black culture and Black narrative, and like why are those narratives not in our history books represented the way that they should be? So really kind of critically examining that. And it starts with who's at the table, because like I said, as a teacher, I have a lot of power over what I choose to teach, what texts I bring, what my essential question is, how I'm going to guide the students to arrive at a conclusion that maybe I'd want them to reach to. So first, it's that diversity and who's at the table. And then the second piece that's there is going to be, do we teach for our students to be critical thinkers? As you mentioned, okay, I've consumed this information and let me make up my mind about what does that mean and what do I want to do about it? Or do we teach students to just memorize and then regurgitate? And while state assessments, I'm not knocking on them, I understand their value, but siloing classes into these compartmentalized subject areas and then having a standardized test served a purpose. It continues to serve a purpose, but it was really designed for an era that doesn't make sense for right now. Coming
Right.
out of the Industrial Revolution, like, it made sense to just really become an expert on a specific subject area and then kind of go out into the field. Whereas now interdisciplinary and inquiry-based learning makes a lot more sense, and really with an eye of raising critical thinkers, that can then, like I said, do something with that information, not just consume it, because you can write a ton of books that are going to sit on a shelf, but how are you going to actually, like you said, give back, do something? And imagine if we were cultivating a ton of young people to want to make the planet a better place. Like, we're going to live in a much better tomorrow than we find ourselves in today.
Well, there's a lot of inertia that comes along with organizations that are this large, right? There's teachers unions and teachers organizations and the textbook companies and the national testing companies, which I've heard are some of the largest nonprofits in America, and they make millions and millions of dollars. So there's some sluggishness for them to want to change their setup, because they're like, it's working, we're making money, so forget everything else. So that's a big obstacle to overcome, which is the machine, effectively, right?
Absolutely. And I think a lot of it falls back on what you said around making money. So I think obviously we know a startup is going to be a lot more agile than an established company that's been around for a long time. But I think that the agility is actually trumped by the money that's backing things up. And so, if we can look at ways for education to get more funding in a way that's actually going to support this motive, that's really where, just in my experience, a lot of the roadblocks come from.
Yeah. Well, this is a compelling conversation. I mean, ideally, the point is that we increase some awareness so people are aware of this. The conversation we had earlier this week with another education type professional was that people don't realize how directly impacted their local school is by property taxes and property value, and how unfair of a system that is, right? And they don't teach you in school the redlining processes that happened in the 60s and 70s that prevented minorities from getting access to bank loans and better housing areas, and all these kind of systemic things that are now leading to this point. And we can't shift it all on just the police, right? Because now there's this overarching issue that, hey, they got stuck in bad neighborhoods. We've got a system where property taxes influence how many students per classroom there are, whether they get books at all versus iPads in a nicer neighborhood. So we got all these big problems that need to be taken care of. But we also have this machine that doesn't want to change course, and it's on this track, on this train track that was built 100 years ago, and it doesn't want to go left or right. It wants to keep going straight and keep growing with what they've got and not change dynamics. So we've got a lot of work to do. So, you know, what do? Defund the school system and then restart it with the new, and is that kind of what charter schools are doing, or are these some of these more independent tech schools, or like high tech highs and things like that are popping up?
Yeah, I actually taught at High Tech High, so know them well. You know, I think that it's a blessing in disguise that the pandemic happened, because it's sometimes you have momentum kind of running in the direction you're running, and you don't really stop to reevaluate, is this the right direction that we're running, you know, towards? And so I think that the pandemic has had forced all of us to stop in our tracks and reevaluate things. So, you know, looking at the educational system in the fall, folks are realizing a lot of schools are going to be virtual 100%, and they're realizing that you can't necessarily cover the same amount of material as you know, virtually as you can in person. And a lot of it is falling on a student's true motivation for even being engaged. Like, do I even want to turn? Because a lot of the Zoom calls or whatever that the teachers are hosting are actually optional. So now that, because you can't force a kid who's sharing, like you said, one laptop with the whole family and doesn't have predictable internet service, you can't force kids to be there anymore. And so now there's kind of two big pieces that are surfacing. One is the learning authentic and engaging enough that with the student's own volition, they're choosing to be there, or they're choosing to engage? And then the second is a sense of agency and reflection within the human being themselves, that youth themselves, of, I'm going to, you know, kind of monitor my progress, ask for help, and so on. So we're kind of catapulting these young people into adulthood. Because think about when you were out of kind of the trucking along in college or in high school, suddenly you're like, well, now I have to have my own motivation to get up and go to work and find a job and like put food on the table, and nobody's kind of putting you on this lockstep program to get there anymore. So I think that it's a telling time to see how schools respond. And I think it's allowing everybody to slow down and say, okay, maybe having 150 standards that I have to just race through, because as a teacher, you want to do the right thing a lot of the times, and you want to teach the students about, a lot of teachers are actually like this, and people who aren't teachers, they think all teachers just are terrible and good for nothing. I mean, there's a mass, you know, kind of stereotype that I dislike very much, because there are a lot of really good-willed teachers who want to revolutionize the system. And then we're met with so much pressure of like, well, if you don't hit these standards, you're going to get fired. If students don't perform on the standardized test, like, you're outed, you know?
Right.
And so now this is saying, wait a minute, I don't think we're going to hit the standards regardless. And in fact, standardized tests were out the window this spring. So let's now go back to, what is the purpose of education? And how do you teach a student to have that intrinsic motivation?
Yeah.
So you know, and I don't have the perfect answer, but I think that this is such an opportunity for us to be intentional, reflective, and actually give some more of that sense of, you know, a child has innate curiosity. You know, if you think about a toddler, and I don't have children, but you do, so you know that they are innately curious, and
Yeah.
just the whole world's a wonder to them, and we squash that in schools. But if we can put that back into the child's hands, so that we are nurturing their sense of curiosity and their sense of wonder, you know, I do think that human beings, we have this pure essence within us, and when we give that power back to them, they will gravitate towards, oh yeah, when I helped somebody, I felt good about myself. Oh yeah, well, when I see my neighbor who's a different skin color than me being persecuted, like, I want to help them. That's what children want to do. And so this is a good thing, I think.
So let me see if I can summarize, and then we can wrap up. So effectively, you're saying that we need to adjust the education system to include a social action aspect of it, to provide additional motivation for people to continue to be lifelong learners, and also give themselves a good sense of purpose throughout life.
Absolutely. And I'll take it one step further to say, and also to create a world that we can be more proud of together, that collect,
I agree.
you know.
Yeah, I like the concept of thinking of our planet as spaceship Earth, and that no one person is their own island independent. Like, we need each other. We need clean air. We need plants. We need
Right.
animals. We need the bugs that take care of things. And people seem to think that, oh, what's in it for me? What do I care if I'm, polluting the planet, or what do I care if I'm littering? Like, but if you think about it as we're just one organism that just happens to be flying around on this huge planet, that's our
Right.
spaceship. We got to take care of our spaceship,
Absolutely.
and each other. We're all integral parts of this thing. So, Mona, I appreciate you spending some time with me. This is a really insightful conversation. I'm glad that we talked, and I hope that you're able to, put your goals into place locally, especially as my kids start going to school. I'll do my best to raise our kids that way, but it'd be great to have it from the school system as well.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for having me. And yeah, let's continue this conversation.
Thanks so much.
All right.
Watch another episode of I've Got a Theory with my special guest, Mona Kiana, today. And so thanks for joining us.
Thank you. Positive.